Welcome back to the Grow Like a Mother podcast. I am your host, Jill, and today I have a guest from down under, Penny Barron, and she has always had a thing for ancient and mythical civilizations. Penny is currently writing the third book in a series about a Sumerian orphan turned oracle, based on a cluster of dreams and impressions that felt at the time more like memories. In her day job, Penny works as a natural therapist and she sees clients and specializes in supporting women healing from trauma, as well as teaching natural therapies at a local college. Having been through trauma herself, it's been a long journey for Penny in finding therapies and interventions that actually work to help her manage the healing process. And so that's what we're talking about today. One of Penny's favorite subjects to talk about is the way traumatic and what we call negative events are seen in a different light when we know more than just our everyday personalities. And from that larger point of view, it's possible to understand our everyday life events from a place of curiosity, to learn about the deeper parts of ourselves, rather than feeling like there's something wrong with us for how we're affected by our experiences. I will put a little trigger warning in here. We are talking about sexual trauma, birth trauma, lots of trauma stuff going on. So if that is something that you feel would be upsetting to you, please feel free to skip this episode, head on back and tune into another one, or go ahead and tune in next week. But without further ado, if you are hanging with us today, allow me to welcome my guest, Penny Barron. Penny, welcome to the Grow Like a Mother podcast.
Thank you so much, Jill. It's really exciting to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I don't even remember how I found you, but when I heard your story and the topics that you talk about, I was like, we got to have her on the show. Like this is just too cool. I'm an author as well, and I love there's just something about people who have written something and had it and like put it out into the world. We're like a different breed, so I always feel connected. Um, do you want to share a little bit about sort of I guess I'm super curious to know about what you're feeling most passionate about these days.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. Well, there's a lot of different stories that led to me writing the book and all of that kind of thing. But the one I was really feeling the energy behind today is to do with sexual trauma. And I guess you'd call it sexual healing. You know that song? What's that song, Lionel Richie's Sexual Healing? I
Oh
used to
yeah.
hate that. I used to hate it because I thought, ew, how sleazy. And then, yeah, I mean, it's only since I've been older that I've gone, oh, actually, that he has a point.
Hmm.
And I mean, I'm a mum of three kids. I've had lots of life experience. I've unfortunately had a lot of sexual trauma myself. And what always, am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
Yes, you sure can.
Thank you. What oh that I should have asked that before. What always gave me the shits about reading novels where the main protagonist, female protagonist, has had sexual trauma and then she meets the one and then they have this explosive hot sex straight up straight away and they're that they live happily ever after. And I every time I read a book like that, I just thought, what a load of shite. Like that
Uh-huh.
is just ridiculous. So I've written these books. The first one, it's kind of back in time in ancient Sumerian times, and there's a protagonist who's orphaned. She goes through this whole series of quite tragic events. She gets sold into slavery. Um, and it doesn't go into the sexual slavery part of things because she does eventually get sold to a brothel, um, and she goes through all this trauma and you don't hear about that so much, but you see the aftermath in kind of towards the end of that first book. Then in the second book she is with the one and trying to recover. And I thought, at first I wrote it with that whole sickening, they have this beautiful whiz bang sex and then all this, and then I thought, no, that's so unrealistic. So then I got rid of all of that. And it kind of coincided with some experiences that I had that were very healing for me with a man. And I thought, yeah, I'm actually going to write about that. And it's not exactly kind of reflecting what I went through. Um, in any of them, but it kind of carries a little bit of a flavor of what it might look like to recover from sexual trauma in a relationship with somebody who you love and who really values you. So that was what I wanted to portray in the book. And having had two, well, do you call them failed marriages if you learn a lot from them?
I don't think so.
Having had two marriages that didn't quite work out, um, and with varying levels of sexual pleasure, given what I've been through, and some of it yawn inducing, um, and other bits really not so great in other ways. And then with the occasional lots of pleasure thrown in, yeah, I guess I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of that reality and that perspective and write it in a book,
Mhm.
put it out.
And I love that you're bringing awareness to the fact that, the narrative that we often hear about in these types of themes it is unrealistic. And for those of us who, I mean, are blessed to have not been touched by sexual trauma, we might not have ever considered that that narrative was incorrect or felt far-fetched. I mean, we probably would consider it far-fetched because fiction is often quite far-fetched, but
Yes.
I love that you're bringing the truth back to it.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and that's really important to me. And especially because I work as a natural therapist. I'm a homeopath, naturopath, nutritionist, and in my clinic, I also see kids with behavioural issues, but I see the vast majority these days of my clients are mums. I cannot tell you how many of them have had some kind of sexual trauma. It's insane how huge it is, the percentage, and whether they have or not, or birth trauma, all of them, every single one of them are struggling with being able to have really good sex.
Yeah.
Um, and even the ones who haven't had sexual trauma, who are stuck with douchebag men who don't help out around the house. And this is another thing that, that I would love to rant about, is that if a woman is married to a man who is not helping out around the house, it's like a turnoff, because then, how many women have you heard say, "Oh, this is my husband Eddie. He's my fourth child. He's
Right.
like my fourth child," and it's such it's like, ew. Why would I want to have sex with that when you're just kind of sitting there with your newspaper complaining about the mess and the noise and not doing a thing to help? But how is that sexually attractive? And then you complain that um, she's not into you and that she's stopped giving you sex. Yeah. Anyway,
Surprise.
so that,
Yeah.
surprise, surprise. That's another part of my rant today that I was thinking about, is that it's not just it's so complex, the whole thing around women's pleasure and sex, um, and
Mhm.
opening to that experience of pleasure and um, surrendering to that openness.
Yeah. You mentioned that a lot of the women that are in your practice either have experienced sexual trauma or birth trauma, and that kind of caught my attention, and it made me wonder, is there, do we see the same type of um, symptoms isn't the right word, but the same types of things happening to women who have had a birth trauma in the department of like pleasure with sex and things like that. Is there any like correlation between the two sort of experiences having anything in common, or is it just two different things?
I thought they were two different things. You would think that they were two different things. Like one of them's through sex and maybe rape or harassment or some kind of violating experience with a man, and the other is, the more I think about it, the more I see them both as symptoms of that. And I hate to bash this word around because it gets bashed around so often. The patriarchal society.
Hmm.
Um, it's a symptom of that uh, inability to understand the process of birth from a woman-centered point of view. So it's kind of that male-centered. And I remember reading something just recently about, even just a woman birthing on her back was unheard of before these men who called themselves barbers came along in like the 1500s and decided that they wanted to break into the birthing market. So they kind of pushed the midwives out by making pregnancy scary so that women would feel fear because there are the risks of complications, but they made pregnancy into this pathological thing, right? So our whole medicalized birthing system is based around that history of medicalizing and pathologizing birth. So then a woman lies on her back like a good little Western woman, and puts her legs up in the stirrups. And then if you try and push that baby out that way, it's against gravity. It's against every single part of our anatomy. But it was put in place, that birthing bed, so that men could have greater access. And especially a particular king back in, I don't even know when it was, decided that he liked to see women giving birth, like creepy, ew. And he put the birthing bed, he kind of promoted that whole setup so that he could watch women give birth. And of course, if you're trying to push a baby out against gravity, how many complications and how much ruination of the pelvic floor and how many interventions are you going to invite? And the birthing unit in hospitals, they're all set up with this birthing bed. You have to kind of bring your own cushions and bean bags usually and support if you want to be able to do it in any other position but lying on your back. And the midwives all have a bit of a hissy fit in the very conventional hospitals if you're in a weird position or, if they can't monitor you because you're moving around. So, yes, I kind of see that in a way. And a lot of women have said to me that they felt violated
Hmm.
after all the interventions that were pushed on them, and that also afterwards they're kind of gaslit into telling themselves that they've got a beautiful healthy baby, so therefore the birth is fine, it went well because out popped this beautiful baby. It doesn't matter if you're torn to smithereens between anus and vagina. It doesn't matter about that at all that matters is that you've got a healthy baby.
Yeah, it's so
And
true.
it's like, oh, okay, so you can't acknowledge the fact that you've hardly got a pelvic floor left, that you can't even sit down after the birth, that it's going to take literally months for you to even be able to consider sex with your husband or partner or whoever you've got there, because you're still healing from this shock of birth. So yes, to answer your question in a very long-winded way, yes, I see them both as the same, as similar things. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're comfortable sharing with the audience, I was particularly intrigued by how this story sort of came into your life in this mix of like past memory stuff and a little bit of that mystical realm.
Mhm.
Would you dive into that a little bit and tell us how that helped shape the story of the book?
Yeah, so this is a huge subject as well. But after I birthed my third child, I went through a stage of postnatal insomnia.
Yeah.
I just couldn't sleep, and it was almost like it ripped away this filter. And this is going to sound really crazy and ugly boogly, but after that, I started meeting new people and being swamped by all these impressions, even though I'd never met them before. And the biggest one of them all was this party that I went to, New Year's Eve party, met this guy, never met him before. And it was like meeting an ex. I was really attracted to him. And at the same time, I wanted to punch his face in. Um, and I was so confused because I'd never met him before. But it was, I mean, surely you'd remember your ex. And I was going back and forth in myself. I'd been in a meditation group by then for about 10 years. So I kind of thought, oh, maybe this is like a past life thing, like what the teacher talks about when you have past life impressions. Anyway, it was so disturbing. I got way too drunk. And then I kind of blanked out and I woke up the next morning going, oh, what happened last night? And then I remembered that I'd been following this guy around the whole time going, you asshole, you're a bastard. I hate you. I'd never met him before. And then I followed the fiance, his fiance around going, watch out for him. He's going to gamble all your money away. He's going to cheat on you. I was like, what the hell? Where did that come from? So once I'd recovered from the worst hangover of my life, I had this dream. I asked the universe, what the hell's that all about? And I got this dream. It was him and me, but it was her and him. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't me, but it was me. And her name was Isabel. I don't know what her name was. It was in the 1920s and they were to be married. And two very rich families coming together, you know, kind of the prince and princess of whatever town it was. And they were doing lots of partying and then they got married, had kids. And then the recession hit, the depression, and all the money disappeared. And the end of the dream, as she had a couple of kids, the end of the dream was her sitting at the kitchen table with this empty cookie tin that should have had the week's rent and everything in it, or the month or whatever, and it was empty. And he came through the back door, drunk as a skunk, with his pockets all hanging out and lipstick all over his collar, and you know he'd spent all the money. And she gets up from the table and throws this cookie tin at him, and that was the end of the dream. So that was past. That was my past life big dream. Anyway, so a similar thing happened with another person that I met that sparked off this set of Sumerian impressions. Now I sound like a complete nutcase.
Can you tell me what is Sumerian? I'm not even sure what that
Yeah.
reference is. Yeah.
Okay, so there was first ancient Sumerian. I think there was Ubaidian times, ancient Sumerian. Then I think it changed to Mesopotamian.
Okay.
These days it's known as Iraq, Iran and Iraq around there, that area. And I remember at school being really fascinated by Mesopotamia. When we learned about it in ancient history, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I was like, oh, and then I went there. I didn't go to Iraq, but I went to Iran, and there was this part of me that was satisfied by being there, this like itch that it was so strange. Anyway, got groped a million times while I was over there. That wasn't impressive. Anyway, so I started having these dreams and visions and nightmares, and I just couldn't get rid of them. And eventually, rather than go insane, because it was kind of driving me a bit nutty, I decided to write it all down. And it was like this really cool story. And when I was writing it all down, it was like a movie in my head. Um, so I decided to kind of flesh it all out a little bit. So there are a few gaps in my memories. It's kind of like being, you know, when you go to, well, local to me is Luna Park, but I don't know what you have local to you, the local fun park. You know, when you go there as a kid and you look back on that memory and it's kind of a little bit blurry, and you just have these really vivid memories of maybe eating what do you guys call it, cotton candy, or being on the big roller coaster or whatever. But they're just little flashes of moments in time, and they're really vivid, but they're not linked together, or they're not, you can't kind of work out what timeline they come in. It's kind of like that with the impressions. So I did sew a lot of them together with imagination, which is why the books are fiction. Um, and I've also wanted to add a whole bunch of stuff that maybe she might have experienced on her journey towards um, just inner enlightenment and trying to find that higher purpose of living and that kind of thing.
Wow. It's so incredible. I love that you took this kind of like frightening and upsetting thing that was happening to you that you didn't quite understand, and you turned it into something beautiful that will be a resource and a help to other people as well as entertainment, right? But to be able to put it down must have been so healing for you, and then to be able to share it with the world. Like, what's that experience been like for you?
It's exciting. Like it's not something um it's not my money making venture. It's
Yeah,
not,
books never are.
I mean, as much as I'd love it to be, it's not like that. I couldn't not write it. And I'm halfway through writing the third at the moment, and it's like there at the back of my mind going, "Ning, ning, ning, ning." So yeah, it's been really exciting and life affirming. And I mean, at the same time, life just goes on, right? It's like, oh
Right.
yeah, I've still got to sweep the floor and look after my kids and make dinner and but there's this little times, little pockets of time where I ignore the housework and the house just goes to crap and I write. And oh my God, if I didn't have that over the last, because it's taken me probably over 10 years to this journey, if I didn't have that, I would have gone mad. I would have had a mental breakdown. I would have been one of those really bitter, angry women that all the men love to rave about on social media.
Yeah.
Um, and my husband at the time, he couldn't stand it because he'd come home and I'd be writing and the house would be a mess. Um, but it's literally what saved me, what saved my sanity, doing something creative like that.
I love that. It's so beautiful to hear that you were able to find something that really soothed you and was a beautiful creation that sort of propelled your life forward as you were healing through it, right?
Yes,
Yeah. Wow. That's beautiful. And this book that you have coming out, as this episode is being released, the book is just about to be birthed. Is this the one
book
that you're
two.
just finishing up now, the book three of the series?
So book two is the one that's just coming out now. I think that they said February. So I had a little sneaky look on Amazon, and the pre-order and all of that stuff is there. And that's the one that has all the sex scenes in it. I mean, there aren't that many, but it has all the real sex scenes in it. Number one doesn't really have anything like that. It's more her journey towards that point of healing. Um, yeah, so book three is only halfway through, so I'm still kind of working out which direction to take it, because there was a bit of a tragic ending for her, but at the same time, there's a little kind of twist that I want to introduce that kind of takes us into the future.
Right. Oh, that's so exciting. That's so exciting.
Yeah,
Wow. And so I'm curious also to know, like, in your work that you do professionally, do you find that there's a lot of links between what you've gone through and sort of like your experience with writing the books? Is there there seems to be that through line of the sexual trauma that kind of touches everywhere. Does that feel like accurate to say?
absolutely. And
Mhm.
I think that thing about the Me Too movement, the all of this outpouring of trauma that women have done over the last few years. And I know that there's been so much pushback from certain groups of people saying, "Oh, well, when's enough going to be enough?" And
Right.
men can't walk around anymore in confidence, feeling like we're not going to be accused of something, and all of that kind of thing. There has been so much silent sexual trauma. Like, what gets reported is the bare ass bones of the tip of the ice. It's not even the tip of the iceberg, it's a scraping of the tip of the iceberg, because there's been shame. There's been so much shame. And I think we grow up, and this is, God, they're such huge subjects. We grow up with this shame about our bodies. We go through puberty, and all of a sudden we sprout this pubic hair and we get, oh God, shock, horror, vaginal discharge. And nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about the kind of primalness of our bodies as we grow, especially for women, because it's all internal. So there's this, and looking at all the ads on Facebook and Instagram and social media around these tiny little skinny women who have hair in all the right places, and they look amazing. Well, what we see is amazing in a bikini, and there's not 1 ounce of fat, and they're all airbrushed within an inch of their lives, and they all kind of look the same, cardboard cutout, Barbie figures. And then we mature, and then we get fat on our butts, and we get like hair where it shouldn't be, Amazon rainforests and all that, and hair on our legs, and we get sweaty and stinky. And I think a lot of us are kind of disgusted by our own bodies, because we're told that we should be these like almost plastic figurines that only have sexual organs when it's time for men's pleasure. And,
Yeah.
uh, and then we don't deserve pleasure. We should be pleasuring men according to their wants and desires, because that's the way I was. And it's not put into words. There's just this conditioning that, we should be grateful to be chosen by a man. And then he should kind of lead in the bedroom. No, I reckon it should be up to us, because if we're treated like goddesses, then we reciprocate in multiplicate, we multiply that. So if a man kind of invests in us and makes us feel beautiful and valued and wonderful, then of course we're going to be generous with what we do as well. It's like kind of in a way, and I know this sounds really sexist, but it's up to the man to help us feel safe, to help us feel beautiful, to help us feel valued and worshipped like the goddesses that we are. And then we go, yeah, let bring it on, baby.
Right.
And we reciprocate that. So that's kind of, I think, yet to be understood in this society, is that shame is holding us back, and it's not doing men or women any favors.
Yeah.
And it's the shame that's stopping us from being able to say no, from being able to protect ourselves, from being able to say that man did that to me.
There's so much in there. Yeah,
I know. We're running out of time, and I'm like, no, but that's
I
such a big
know.
subject.
Yeah, well, it's such a big subject, and I just one thing that I just feel called to really acknowledge and make sure the listeners heard this because it landed in my body really strongly is when you said that as we are getting older and our bodies are changing, like we're disgusted by our bodies because we're thinking that we need to be a different way. And that's happening to me. Like my body is changing. I'm almost 40 and I in my mind think I should still look like the perfect I was very lucky. Like I had that perfect Barbie body when I was 16 and I feel like I should still be looking like that. I think a
Yes,
lot of moms and women in general feel the same way. Um,
yes.
the other
Menopause
thing
and that
that I want to,
grieving.
sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Or perimenopause and that grieving for the way and our progesterone just goes splat at around that 35 to 40 age. And all of a sudden we are getting little pockets of fat everywhere and little funny, like, what the hell?
Right. But
Yeah.
it's normal. It is one of
Yeah.
these things, like you had said, that doesn't get talked about. Like, not only is the normal stuff not getting talked about, the bodily
Yeah.
stuff that we experience in the puberty and in perimenopause and everywhere
Yes.
in between, but also the stuff that's happening to our bodies from other people is not being talked about. So there's different
Yes.
layers of sort of silence that allows for this to continue as status quo, right?
It's a silent epidemic. And I think it's only just coming out now because the younger generations are going, nah, screw this shit. I've seen my mum suffer. I'm not going to suffer. I'm going to be loud and proud about it.
I didn't realize how much I think I needed to hear this conversation today. So thank you for being vulnerable and showing up and speaking your truth and the truth that so many people aren't talking about because they don't feel safe or comfortable or there's still shame around it for them. If people
And
are,
it's not even just finding a 26-year-old to do that with.
yeah,
If you're married, if you're in a relationship, to have that conversation with your partner about pleasure and about what and really get in touch with your body and find out what does open you up, what does make you feel like a goddess and wanted, you know,
yeah.
beautiful.
And like you had said earlier that you had said it felt sexist to say, but it was kind of the man's job to fill that role. And I was thinking at the time, so it's kind of full circle now to end with this. It's like, and if there's no man there, we can still we can still put ourselves on that pedestal. It's like,
Yes. Yes.
the
Yes.
whole point is that we're on a pedestal now.
Yes.
That is the point. Yeah.
Yes. And if you're taking matters into your own hands, don't just, we're lying there, maybe playing with your toy or whatever you're doing. Don't just get up and wash it off and then go to sleep. like lie there with yourself, give yourself a few little nice strokes, give yourself a hug, all of that stuff. Do to yourself what you would like your partner or a partner to do.
Yeah. Ah, well, this is great. Thank you so, so much for coming on.
It's a pleasure.
I'm sure people are intrigued and will want to know more about you and how to contact you and how to get your books. Can you share all that with us?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, the books are just on Amazon.
Perfect.
And the first one is called The Oracle of Ur, or Ur, or however you want to say it. The second one is called Temple of Lies. That's the one that's just coming out. Haven't fully published the third one yet. And I just work in a little clinic in Sydney. So I can put the website up of that for people. I mean, I know this is an overseas podcast, and sometimes that's really tricky with time zones and all of that. But yeah, I'm happy to put my website up and you can have a look. I don't really go on about sex in my bio, just people just find me anyway.
Oh, I love it.
I'm
Well,
not a sex expert either. Just so you know, I'm not a sex expert. I haven't done any like formal training in that.
yeah, but it's so nice to be able to have these conversations from personal experience, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
beautiful. Well, thank you again so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. And to everyone who is listening, until next week, keep on growing like a mother.